on jobs and also very good for companies, which also means jobs.
Live analysis now with Mattie Duppler. She is Senior Fellow at the National Taxpayers Union, and she joins us live from Washington, D.C. this morning. Mattie, thanks for stepping in. First of all, do you think lawmakers can have this on the president's desk by Christmas?
I'm optimistic that we can get this done even before Christmas. It was an exciting day in Washington, D.C. You had House and Senate conference committee members talking enthusiastically about tax reform. At almost the same time, you had the president at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue discussing why tax reform is so important. So the expectation is that a conference committee report will be available by the end of the week, and that means the Senate and then the House can take that bill up next week and have it on the president's desk by Wednesday even at the earliest.
So, Mattie, opponents to this bill still say it favours the wealthy and for corporations, and it does very little for the American household. What type of pushback do you expect to see? And can I also ask you, how do you think this is going to play out with the general public?
Well, that opposition is really the trope that has been trotted out every time a Republican tries to overhaul the tax code. There's a number of reasons that average Americans should be excited about the tax overhaul. And that's one of the points that the president made today in his speech, which is that Americans will start seeing differences in their paychecks starting next year. You know, as soon as this tax plan is passed into law and signed by the president, the IRS can get to work changing the withholding tables and implementing this law so that within the first couple of pay periods of 2018, average Americans will see a difference. Now, the cut in the corporate income tax rate, as you mentioned earlier, probably dropping to 21% rather than the 20% that had been instated in the House and Senate bills, is still a massive reduction from where we are today. The 35% corporate income tax rate that the United States has is the highest in the developed world. It's clear that it's uncompetitive, and it's clear enough that both both Republicans and Democrats in the past have supported cutting that corporate income tax rate. President Obama, in every single one of his budgets, proposed cutting the corporate income tax rate, recognizing that getting that rate lower is key to spurring economic growth and increasing wages and economic prosperity for Americans across the income spectrum.
One thing I know you've been following very closely, Mattie, is the impact that this is going to have on the deficit. That certainly is not trope in this. Janet Yellen also weighed in on that in a part of her speech that she gave last night. I wanted to play this for you, and then I'll get your reaction off the back. Listen in.
I am personally concerned about the U.S. debt situation. It's not that the debt to GDP ratio at the moment is extraordinarily or worrisomely high, but it's also not very low. And it's projected, as the population continues to age and the baby boomers retire, that that ratio will continue to rise in an unsustainable fashion.
So, Mattie, what's your thoughts on this? This is going to add more than $1 trillion to the deficit. Isn't that just going to impact future generations of Americans who will eventually have to pay it back?
I agree with the chairwoman that the debt is a significant problem that we need to pay attention to. And you're right, the tax plan will add $1.5 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. But look at that another way. That's a little bit over $100 billion a year, which is nothing compared to the $4 trillion size of the United States government. In addition, we're looking at the next 10 years, we've got tens of trillions of dollars of debt that we're accumulating, as Chairwoman Yellen mentioned, with our entitlement programs, Social Security and Medicare. We need to get those on the path to solvency. So I certainly don't mean to belittle the problem at all. Getting to a sustainable level of spending and taxation is very important. But in the United States, especially in the last 10 years, all of the problems that we see with our debt and deficit are coming from the fact that we spend too much money, not that we don't take enough in. So this tax cut that is going to be passed into law allows Americans to keep more money in their pocket. And I certainly trust American businesses and families to spend their money better than the United States government. So moving forward, serious lawmakers need to take a look at our debt and deficit and need to figure out where we can discipline our spending a little bit better in order to keep those numbers in check. But when it comes to a tax plan that will increase economic growth, I'm confident that the feedback from that tax plan combined with the dynamic effects will really create a more prosperous economy moving forward and will ameliorate a lot of problems that we might see, that we might anticipate with an increase in the deficit.
So, Mattie, how do you think we need to ease the concern around this area? Because it has been one key concern among those lawmakers who have been, erring on the side of caution when it comes to actually voting in favour of this bill. That deficit is only going to increase the burden on younger generations of Americans moving forward. So how do we actually fix this problem? I mean, can the US government actually tax its way out of debt, or do you say there needs to be significant reforms on the spending side? Where specifically?
The United States absolutely cannot tax its way out of debt. Even if you taxed every single worker and every single CEO in this country, we wouldn't be able to account for the looming liabilities in Medicare and Social Security. So we need to look at what those pressures are and why they're putting so much pressure on our budget. So looking forward in the future, two things need to happen. One, we need to have an economy with a regulatory regime and a tax system that allows for entrepreneurs, workers, employers, and families to not only have certainty in the United States economy, but also be able to plan and invest back in this economy. And you mentioned young people. Young people, by and large, are acting as their own bosses now. They're starting their own businesses. We need a tax system that encourages them to do so and rewards entrepreneurs along the way. Right now, the tax system benefits really those who are stationed, firmly ensconced in the economy already, the well-connected, big corporations. We need to make sure we have a tax code that works for the people who are thinking ahead for the future, and that by and large is young people. So things like dropping that corporate income tax rate is important because it will spur productivity and increase wages, but also things in the bill like increasing business expensing. That gets rid of a lot of the onerous rules that small businesses have to account for when trying to deduct the capital investments they make in their business. That will obviously help new business owners quite a bit. So there's a lot that we can do on our tax code to really increase the ability for young people, families, and businesses of all sides to succeed.
Mattie, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. That's Mattie Duppler, Senior Fellow at the National Taxpayers Union. Republicans say they want to get a tax reform